They called it redemption, but for most men sent there, it was a slow, predictable death. The Soviet penal battalions weren't elite shock troops or heroic volunteers. They were the disgraced, the unwanted, and the condemned, thrown into the worst battles of the Eastern Front with rifles, desperation, and orders to die before stepping back. Many believed anything was better than a prison camp. They were wrong. What waited for them wasn't a second chance, but a meat grinder dressed up as patriotism. So why did the Soviet Union rely on units it never expected to survive? The Soviet Union didn't create penal battalions because it wanted redemption arcs. It created them because, in 1941, the Red Army was collapsing so fast that survival seemed impossible. When the Eastern Front collapsed in 1941 and early 1942, it wasn't just because German tanks were fast or their tactics were clever. The Red Army was falling apart from the inside. Entire divisions broke. Commanders abandoned positions without orders, and thousands of terrified soldiers simply walked off the battlefield. To Joseph Stalin, this wasn't a military problem, it was betrayal. So, in July 1942, he issued one of the harshest wartime documents ever written, Order Number 227, the infamous command that ended with 3 brutal words, "Not one step back." The order wasn't just a slogan, it created a whole system built to force discipline through fear. Commanders who pulled back without permission were stripped of rank, dragged to courts-martial, and often executed. Ordinary soldiers who panicked or hesitated were sent to newly formed penal companies and penal battalions, the Shtrafbat. These units became dumping grounds for anyone Stalin considered unreliable. Deserters, cowards, officers who made a single mistake, political prisoners, and even regular soldiers caught at the wrong place at the wrong time. By late 1942, more than 24,000 men were already serving in these formations. A year later, that number exploded to over 177,000, turning the Shtrafbat system into a massive parallel army, an army made of the damned. Order 227 also introduced something even darker, blocking detachments. These NKVD units stood behind regular troops with orders to shoot anyone who tried to flee. In just the first months, they shot around 1,000 soldiers and detained more than 15,000 who attempted to retreat from the Stalingrad front. The message was simple: advance or die, hesitate or die, survive only if luck allows it. Penal battalions were deliberately sent to the worst missions, clearing minefields, probing enemy defenses, and storming fortified positions. Survival was never the point. Redemption came only through blood, but most wouldn't live long enough to earn it. Stalin didn't just build an army of outcasts, he built a machine that ran on fear, sacrifice, and the belief that the motherland could only be saved by throwing its broken men at the fire first. Life inside a Soviet Shtrafbat wasn't ordinary military service. It was a sentence, carried out with a rifle and a ticking deadline you could feel. The moment a man entered a penal battalion, he ceased to be considered a soldier. In official Soviet paperwork, Shtrafniki were classified as temporarily expendable elements. Their job was simple: take the hits so the regular units didn't have to. Most Shtrafbats were a mix of defeated soldiers, deserters, petty criminals, drunk officers, political offenders, and panicked teenagers caught retreating without an order. NKVD reports mention everything from cowardice to improper withdrawal to spreading rumors as reasons for being sent here. Some were guilty, many weren't. The discipline was suffocating. According to Order 227, barrier troops were placed behind Shtraf units with instructions to shoot anyone who hesitated, broke formation, or tried to retreat. NKVD files confirm that in 1942 alone, over 13,000 Soviet soldiers were executed by barrier units. Shtrafbats fought knowing death could come from the front or the rear. Every day of life was brutal. Uniforms were old, boots were mismatched, Many carried rifles with barely enough ammunition. Food rations were worse than those of regular infantry, sometimes half, because Shtrafniki were considered temporary. Soviet veteran Sergei Smirnov recalled that some men arrived with nothing but a helmet and a shovel. Missions were designed to break them: minefield clearing without equipment, storming bunkers without artillery support, chasing retreating Germans through forests filled with hidden machine gun nests. Archivists estimate that penal companies suffered casualty rates 3 to 6 times higher than standard rifle divisions. The 123rd Penal Company's near wipeout, 47 survivors from 670, was not unusual. Many penal companies lasted only 10 to 20 days before being replaced entirely. Executions also hung over daily life. After the 61st Penal Company failed an assault, the commander had 3 soldiers shot during morning formation to improve discipline. This wasn't rare. NKVD logs confirm similar punishments across dozens of units. And yet, strangely, some men became fierce fighters. Officers who'd lost their rank had everything to prove. Soviet records show that 14% of Shtrafniki earned reinstatement through acts of extreme bravery. To them, heroism was the only way out. The standard term for a soldier in a penal unit was 3 months, after which their rank and honors were restored, and they were reassigned to a regular unit. Exceptional bravery could shorten this period. Wounds sustained in combat often earned early discharge. Soldiers who distinguished themselves in this way were frequently decorated, and some even received the prestigious title of Hero of the Soviet Union. Regardless, inside a Shtrafbat there was no comfort, no trust, and no guarantee that today wouldn't be your last morning roll call. It was a world where survival depended on luck, instinct, and how long your body could keep going. While we are on the topic of life inside a Shtrafbat, let's look at the story of a man who went from punishment to legendary sacrifice. Lieutenant Vladimir Yermach didn't belong on the front lines, or so the army thought. At just 19, he accidentally killed a soldier while cleaning his weapon. Under Stalin's Order 227, mistakes like that were deadly serious. Yermach was sent to a Shtrafbat, a penal battalion, where soldiers convicted of cowardice, negligence, or disobedience were sent to die, or, if luck favored them, to earn redemption through fire and blood. Just like other soldiers, for him life in a Shtrafbat was hell on earth. Soldiers were thrown into the deadliest missions, with officers ready to execute anyone who faltered. Survival was a game of nerve and chance. The rules were harsh but clear. Serve your 3-month sentence or prove exceptional courage, and you could regain rank, awards, and a transfer back to a regular unit. Some emerged heroes, most did not. Yermach didn't have time to hesitate. 10 days into his sentence, during a reconnaissance operation near Leningrad on July 19, 1943, he saw a German machine gun bunker mowing down his comrades. Without a second thought, he rushed it and used his own body to shield his unit. He died instantly, but his act saved lives and allowed his battalion to advance. Major Lessig, commander of the 14th Separate Assault Battalion, posthumously awarded Yermach the Order of the Red Banner and recommended him for the title Hero of the Soviet Union, which was granted on February 21, 1944. Yermach's story shows the cruel logic of the Shtrafbat. It was punishment, yes, but also a place where bravery could rewrite your fate. In that world of fear and death, heroism became the only path to survival. And, for those like Yermach, it meant leaving a mark that would outlive the battalion itself. In August 1942, shortly after Stalin issued Order Number 227, forbidding retreat under penalty of death, the first Soviet penal battalions arrived at the front lines of Stalingrad. These were men stripped of rank, accused of cowardice, failure, or disobedience, now sent to the most perilous sectors of the battlefield. By the autumn of 1942, 6 separate penal battalions and dozens of penal companies were operating around Stalingrad and the Don Front. Altogether, around 30 penal companies were engaged in the fighting, forming what could be described as the Red Army's high-risk shock troops. Shtrafniki were assigned the most dangerous tasks, leading assaults on heavily fortified German positions, clearing minefields for advancing troops, and holding faltering lines under intense fire. Many units faced attacks with minimal support, increasing the likelihood of casualties. Losses were immense. One early penal battalion of 929 demoted officers saw its numbers drop to just 300 survivors within 3 days. Overall, penal units suffered losses 6 times higher than standard infantry in comparable operations. Behind the lines, NKVD barrier troops ensured no unauthorized retreat occurred, enforcing discipline with arrest or summary execution. This meant that soldiers faced pressure from both front and rear, leaving no margin for error. At Stalingrad, penal battalions became a tool of both punishment and necessity. Units whose survival depended on courage under fire, where every operation tested not just skill, but willpower. Their participation exemplified the harsh calculations of the Red Army, turning penal soldiers into an effective, if costly, instrument in the fight to hold the city. While we have explored life inside a Shtrafbat, it's impossible to understand their true role without examining the battles where these units were thrown into the fire. One such story comes from the 65th Penal Company during the Soviet advance in Ukraine. On December 14, 1943, the company, alongside the training battalion of the 72nd Guards Rifle Division, stormed the German-occupied village of Sotninsky Khutor. The attack met with intense resistance, forcing a partial retreat. In the destruction, 15 Shtrafniki became isolated from the rest of their unit. For 3 brutal days, these men held their ground against German forces, delaying reinforcements and absorbing the enemy's attention. By December 18th, Soviet forces launched a renewed assault, finally liberating the encircled men. Although the overall mission failed, approximately 30 members of the 65th Penal Company were later transferred to regular units. 5 soldiers who had fallen during the ordeal were posthumously awarded the Order of the Patriotic War, a sad but rare recognition of bravery in penal battalions. Penal units were also deployed in the harsh Arctic conditions along the Musta-Tunturi Ridge, where the front had remained static for over 3 years. On October 10, 1944, the 614th Penal Company of the Northern Fleet attacked fortified German positions from the Barents Sea, drawing enemy fire away from the main Soviet offensive. Scaling sheer cliffs under constant machine gun fire and cutting through barbed wire, they suffered catastrophic losses, with roughly 70% of the company perishing. Among them, 3 men, including Sergeant Alexander Danilchenko, sacrificed themselves to neutralize enemy machine guns. Across these campaigns, Soviet penal battalions combined extraordinary bravery with almost unimaginable attrition. Their missions were nearly always suicidal, yet they shaped critical outcomes in Stalingrad, Ukraine, Poland, and the Arctic. While the Shtrafniki were condemned men in the eyes of the state, their blood and courage often tipped the scales of battle, proving that even soldiers marked for punishment could become. The legacy of the Shtrafbat did not die with the fall of the Soviet Union. In modern Russia, units like Storm Z have revived the old formula, sending convicts and men with disciplinary records into the deadliest combat zones. These men are promised early release or reduced sentences if they survive, but survival is far from guaranteed. They are thrown into assaults with minimal training, little support, and missions so dangerous that most do not make it back. Reports from the conflict in Ukraine show Storm Z units storming fortified positions, holding key choke points under relentless artillery and machine gun fire, and acting as a buffer for regular troops. It is a brutal gamble with human lives, where courage can save both comrades and the soldier's own future, but death waits patiently for those who falter. The principles are the same as in Stalin's Shtrafbats: condemned men, desperate to live, sent straight into fire. Order number 227 still holds today. The story of the Soviet Shtrafbats and Russia's modern Storm Z units shows a sad truth about war. Some men are sent to fight not for honor, but because they are considered replaceable. Yet even in impossible situations, courage and sacrifice shine through. Every mission, every life lost or saved, is part of a history we shouldn't forget. If you want to hear more real stories of bravery, hardship, and survival, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We uncover the untold tales of war, and you won't want to miss what's coming next.